Hello friends, my name is Max, welcome back to my channel. This is my first wrap-up video that I am making and I'm so excited. Hopefully I'm going to be able to do it because I have a very forgetful brain, so I'm thinking about like the first books I read in this month and trying to remember how I actually felt about them. But we'll go with it. So welcome back to my channel. If you're new, my name is Max. Welcome. My pronouns are they, them, and here I talk about all things books and being an autistic ADHDer. So let's get into all the books I read this month in January of 2024. This month I read a crazy 11 books, which is unusual for me. I had a heavy reading month. I'm on my 12th book now. Today is the 31st of January, but we're only going to talk about the ones that I've finished. So, actually I'm on my 13th book. I'm in the middle of 2 books, and I will mention them at the end, but let's talk about all the ones I finished first. So firstly, I read Murder at the Theatre Royale. So I read this at the very beginning of January, and I don't have my copy of it with me. I left it in France where I was at the beginning of January. And it was very good, it was very enjoyable. It wasn't anything special or particularly spectacular, but I enjoyed it. I had a fun time with it. It's quite Christmassy, it's set at Christmas time. It's very camp, which I think is what I liked about it. I love like those camp dramatic mysteries. It kind of reminded me actually of the most recent season of Only Murders in the Building. If you've seen that, very similar vibe. I gave this a 3.5 stars. It was really enjoyable, and that's kind of that. The next book I read in January, I'm like looking down, referring to my Goodreads, just in case you're wondering what I'm looking at. The next book I read in January was Philip Pullman's Northern Lights. This was a reread for me. I read this when I was in middle school or early high school or something, I don't remember. As I said, I have a dreadful memory, but this was also really enjoyable. I love the world of his Dark Materials, and I'd never reread it until now. I've watched the BBC adaptation TV series version, and that was so good. I enjoyed it so much. So when I found this, I knew I had to pick it up and do a reread because I thought I would enjoy it so much, and I did. This world and Philip Pullman in general is just one of those people where I'm like, I don't understand how he created this just from out of his head. Like, how can people do that? How can people just create this entire world that seems so real and that seems so tangible? It's exceptional in terms of world building. And if you like fantasy, I would really recommend this series. I've got an itchy bottom lip. Sorry if I've just been going like this for a minute. That looks so weird. Let's see what I wrote on my Goodreads about this. So this was a 5-star read for me. I'm getting a little bit confused because I'll talk about next, but I also read Philip Pullman's Book of Dust Part 2 this month, so my recollection of this is a little bit mucky because I read that one as well. I'm not too sure what else I have to say about it other than, even if you haven't read fantasy before, or don't know if you would like fantasy, or have only read very low stakes fantasy, or just want to dip your toes in, this would be a good one to start with, I think. In my opinion, there's nothing else like these books, this trilogy, or this world. I feel like with a lot of fantasy, there's a lot of things that are really similar. Like, there's lots of vampires and dragons and all of that sort of stuff. But with this, it's like a whole genre in and of itself. It's hard to explain. Just give it a go. Next book I read in January was the good old hefty Philip Pullman's The Book of Dust Volume 2. I had put off reading this for actual years because it's so big. This book is a whole 687 pages. I don't know if I've ever read a book so big. I have a few things to say. I'm going to put it down because I don't want to keep holding it up because it's so heavy. Firstly, I can see why he made it so long. I can see why he felt the need to write all the things he wrote and to have that many elements to the story. The entire thing was very enjoyable. For me though, I get a proper good dopamine hit when I finish a book. And so reading this and having it take so many more days than it would usually take me to read a book I kind of felt like I was in a lull about halfway through. I started getting a little bit frustrated because I felt like, oh, he really could have made this shorter. He didn't necessarily need to put that section in. But on reflection, I can see that it was all necessary, and it was just me getting antsy about the fact that this book was so long. If that's not the type of thing that bothers you and you're not like excited about getting to the end of a book, then this book is super enjoyable. It's, I wouldn't say necessarily fast paced, but there's always something going on. It's intriguing, it's surprising, it takes twists and turns that I didn't expect. The only other thing that I didn't enjoy very much about it is that, and this will be a spoiler if you haven't read the Book of Dust Volume 1. So if you haven't read the Book of Dust Volume 1, skip on about 30 seconds. So I kept hoping throughout the whole book that Lyra and Pan would find their way back to each other. It's not that much of a spoiler that at the beginning of the book they're not in a very good place with each other and things are very difficult and strained between them, but they spend most of the book apart, and I found that really difficult. I found it really sad. I just wanted them to get back together. I just wanted them to be with each other again. I just wanted them to heal their relationship, and I just found it so sad that they were apart for like the majority of this book. My little 13-year-old heart, who loved the Golden Compass movie so much, was just so sad about that. But I definitely think if you're someone who previously enjoyed any of the content surrounding this world, his Dark Materials series, the books or the TV show or the Golden Compass movie from yonks ago, you would definitely enjoy the His Dark Materials books and the Book of Dust series. It is worth reading. It's worth reading. Slurp. Gotta have a nice hot cuppa when you're talking about books. Or always. Okay, next we have another one that I didn't bring back from France with me, but I was still in France at this point in January, so I left my copy of it there. And that was The Unsinkable Greta James. Oh, I forgot to tell you what rating I gave The Book of Dust, Volume 2. I gave it 3 stars. 3.75 to clarify. I might actually change that rating on reflection. No, that is actually correct. 3.75. Okay, moving on. The Unsinkable Greta James was the 4th book I read this month. I gave this 1 star and I don't feel bad about it. I'm surprised I didn't DNF. If you're watching this video and you're not usually a Booktube person, but you're just watching it because you like me. I know my bestie is probably watching this video and she's not going to know what I mean by DNF. So DNF means do not finish. So if you pick up a book, you start reading it and you decide, I do not want to finish this book. That is what's called a DNF. So I DNF'd this book. No, I did not DNF this book, but I'm surprised that I didn't. I ended up wanting to push through and finish it because I was optimistic about how it might end. And it did end nicely, but I just did not enjoy the story of it in the slightest. It felt like not much was happening. It felt like it was a bit depressing. It just really fell flat for me. I always listen to audiobooks at the same time as reading. Most of the time I do. And the audiobook of this was actually good. The performance of the audiobook was good. It was read by Mae Whitman, who is a very good, well-known actress. If you've seen Good Girls on Netflix, she plays one of the 3 main women. She's a really good actress and she read the book really well. The performance was really good, but the actual content was just not for me. It kind of makes me realise that that type of genre that's a bit more literary fiction, a bit more not really super plot driven and more about relationships and challenging relationships at that, not really for me. Which is unfortunate because my sister got me this book for Christmas. But I still did read it and I semi-enjoyed the audiobook. Wouldn't necessarily recommend though. Then, on the complete other end of the spectrum altogether, we have As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. This is the 3rd book in the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy, and oh my gosh, it was my favourite of the 3. I gave this 5 stars. There's a lot of people I've seen in Goodreads reviews that really didn't like how this went. I'm not going to spoil it or anything, but the main character makes certain decisions and does certain things that a lot of people feel like she shouldn't have done or wouldn't have done, but I loved it. It had so many twists and turns that I was not expecting in the slightest. It went in a direction that I completely was not expecting at all. But at the same time, it finished off the series and rounded off the series in such a good way. If you haven't read this trilogy, no matter whether you're a crime mystery person or if you're more of an adult crime person and you don't really read YA, please read this anyway. The whole series. You know how some people say that they wish they could read certain books for the first time again, like they wish they could experience them again as if it was the first time they're reading them? That's how I feel about the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. Okay, next we have Cassandra Clare's City of Bones. This is the first book in the Shadowhunters Mortal Instruments series. I have spoken about this before in a video. Oh, in my 24 books that I want to read in 2024 video, because I want to read the rest of this series. But I had a few little sneaky issues with this. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars. It's enjoyable, it's unusual, it's a really cool concept. Basically the concept is that it's set in this world, but in this version of this world, all of the kind of mystical, magical creatures that we think are myth are actually real. So there are warlocks, there are fairies, there are demons, angels, vampires, werewolves. All of these type of creatures exist in this version of our world. And the Shadowhunters are people who kind of try to uphold the laws of these mystical creatures and kill demons. So at the beginning of this book we find ourselves with this girl called Clary who finds out in the first however many pages that she is actually a shadow hunter, and it follows on from there. I had a really enjoyable time with this, and I found myself after reading this wanting to know more about what happens in the next books. So I am actually currently reading City of Ashes, which is the second one in this series, but I just found some of the language and some of the things that the characters say to be a little bit problematic, a little bit questionable, made me cringe a little bit, turned me off a little bit. Slightly sexist sometimes, very, very slight potential homophobic judgments sometimes. Very, very slight, but just one of those things where I read something and I'm like, oh, I definitely wouldn't have written a character saying that. Maybe only 2 or 3 times in this book, but definitely something that I flagged and definitely something that made me question whether I wanted to read on or not. But I did give this a 3.5 stars and found it a really enjoyable, fun read. What's next? Okay, this is a cool one. The next book I read in January was Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Old and Wise by Katherine Rundell. So Katherine Rundell is known for being a children's author. She has written adult books as well though. I think of her as one of those authors that's just incredibly clever and does things in a very intelligent, creative way. I had actually also already listened to this in December, but I want to make a video about it, so I listened to it again so that I could make notes. The audiobook is read by her, I don't have a physical copy, and it's really enjoyable. She makes some very good points and you're going to hear me talk about it more in a future video, so I'll leave it at that. How many stars did I give it though? I gave it 5 stars. That's how I feel about Katherine Rundell in general. Next, I read The Orange and Other Poems by Wendy Cope. I spotted this in my local library and it brought me back to a memory of high school. When I was in high school, we studied The Orange and I loved it. I don't know what makes me love it so much, but I still do love it. It's a love poem. That probably tells you a lot about me and my incredibly romantic soul. So this is a poetry collection that contains The Orange and multiple other Wendy Cope poems, and when I spotted it I was like, oh, I used to love that poem. That was my favourite poem growing up. So yeah, I picked it up and I really enjoyed it. I love how Wendy Cope plays with rhyme and rhythm. The poetry is straightforward, like it's not complicated to understand at all. It's really easy language, it's easy to read. If you want to start getting into poetry, I would definitely recommend some Wendy Cope. But it's also super satisfying to read because She makes satisfying analogies and she rhymes in a really satisfying way. It's very down-to-earth poetry, that's how I would describe it. I'm just going to read The Orange to you because it's really lovely. The Orange. At lunchtime I bought a huge orange. The size of it made us all laugh. I peeled it and shared it with Robert and Dave. They got quarters and I had a half. And that orange, it made me so happy, as ordinary things often do. Just lately, the shopping, a walk in the park, this is peace and contentment, it's new. The rest of the day was quite easy. I did all the jobs on my list and enjoyed them and had some time over. I love you, I'm glad I exist. It's just so lovely and such satisfying poetry. I would give that poem on its own 5 stars, but I gave the compilation in general 4 stars. Next we have, okay, this is an interesting one. This is Isaac and the Egg by Bobby Palmer. This is a wonderful, wonderful book. It's heartwarming, it's about grief and loss, but it's also about finding yourself amidst that. That sounds really cheesy, but that is what it's about. It's about finding your way through a grieving process, but the book itself is not super sad. It's heartwarming, it's full of love, and it's really quirky. I would 100% recommend this book. I enjoyed the process of reading it so much. The guy who reads the audiobook as well is really good. It's one of those books that just makes you feel good about humanity and about being a human, which I feel like in this day and age we need more of. I found myself finding it difficult to rate this book though, and I still don't really know what rating I would give it. It's really not the type of genre that I would usually read either, which is why I'm finding it hard to rate. It's almost like finding it hard to rate a memoir or an autobiography because it feels like I'm rating somebody's life. I think honestly if I would have to pick, I would give it 5 stars because it's so well written. It's such an unusual concept, it's such an unusual plot and story, and it's such an unusual and clever, like intelligent way of depicting the grieving process. I would recommend this to anyone and everyone, no matter like what genres you usually read. Okay, we have 2 more. This is interesting. My next book that I picked in January was The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time. Now, as I explained in my 24 books that I want to read in 2024 video, I have a sentimental attachment to this book because my great-grandparents bought it for me when I was, I think it says in the front how old, in 2006. That's 18 years ago. What? So I was 11. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, so sentimental attachment to this book. I wanted to reread it because when I was 11, I didn't know that I'm autistic, and this book is about an autistic kid. So I started to read and it was making me very uncomfortable. I actually ended up DNFing this at about 75 pages, which really disappointed me, but I just couldn't continue to read it. I felt like what was happening was that it was perpetuating like a harmful stereotype of an autistic child, which was so disappointing because I really wanted it to be good and I really wanted to see myself represented in some type of way, but I definitely was not. And yeah, it just made me uncomfortable to read, so I had to put it down. Yeah, I don't really have much more to say on that. I wouldn't recommend it. If you have read this book, I would like to make you aware that this is not an accurate representation of an autistic child whatsoever. Here is what I wrote in my Goodreads review. I wrote, DNF'd at 75 pages because it was so uncomfortable to read an autistic person being represented in this way. As an autistic person myself, I felt that this book was perpetuating harmful stereotypes about autistic folks. Also, even though Christopher is 15 in this book, it was marketed as a book for adults, so I felt like it was perpetuating the infantilisation of autistic folks too. Unfortunate, because I was really looking forward to reading a book with autistic representation. That's all I have to say, unfortunately. Oh, and we've got a juicy one for the last book. Okay, hopefully we'll be able to do this before it gets too dark outside. I initially gave this book 4 stars, but I'm considering changing it to 5. and that was Suddenly a Murder by Lauren Munoz. I randomly picked this up in the works because it was cheap, and I'm so glad I did. I was not expecting it to be as good as it was. I did have trouble initially getting into it, and I think that's just because there's multiple main characters. And it was a lot for me to absorb, but once I got past that point, like sometime between 50 to 100 pages, like maybe 50-60 pages, I really started enjoying it. It's such a good plot, it's such a good concept. Basically, these 6 teenagers graduate from high school and they decide to go to this manor on an island that's like isolated from everyone. One of them ends up being murdered, and it's all about how this murder investigation goes down, what each of these teenagers are dealing with, the detectives that come and have to interview them all. It's so juicy. There's a library, there are secret passages, there's relationship drama. It was such a... oh, that's the back of it. It was such a fun read, and I would definitely recommend it if you're into like cozy mysteries. So the 2 that I'm currently reading are Cassandra Clare's City of Ashes. As I said, you know what really annoys me? That there's this big huge sticker thing on here, but it's not a sticker. You can't take it off. And it's an advertisement for the movie that came out in like 2013 or something. Anyway, so I'm on page 150. And I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm about 1/3 of the way through. Definitely recommend this series if you're contemplating it. And then the other book I'm in the middle of is Rick Rubin's The Creative Act. I'm on page 113 and really enjoying it. I'm trying to savour this a bit and not go through it all in one go, because I want the thoughts and ideas to kind of percolate in the back of my mind while I'm reading it. So basically Rick Rubin just goes through tips basically of how to live a creative life, and I'm really loving it so far. Obviously you'll see what I think of these 2 in my February wrap up, but yeah, that's what I'm on currently. Thank you so much everyone for joining me through this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you're enjoying my videos, because that really helps me, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!